Gentlemen, my presentation is on the protection of sources, and also I'll be talking to you about digital security. My name, as I have introduced myself, as Hopewell Radebe. I'm actually facilitating because our project manager for this webinars, it's Mary Papaya, who unfortunately it's not well. She has lost her voice. I phoned her this morning trying to talk to her, and I could tell that I would have been really forcing her to sort of, you know, sing a very horsey things to you and not be able to facilitate. So let's go on without wasting more time. So on dealing with the protection of sources first, and it is important for all of us to ask the question, why do journalists need to protect their sources? The most generic answer you'll get from a professor or a person who's a lecturer would be that journalists rely on sources, you know, to what you call on source protection, to gather and reveal information in the public interest from confidential sources. And we all know that had it not been for sources, and had it not been the ability of journalists in South Africa, investigative journalists in particular, to what you call to be able to protect their sources, we may not have gone this far with the investigations into the Gupta leaks, or even gotten the Gupta leaks, let alone leading up to the commission by the Zondo Commission being established to what you call to deal with state capture. So sources, of course, then we all know that they often need or require the anonymity to protect them from physical harm, from economic harm, even from professional reprisals, because some people end up no longer being promoted because of what they had revealed and in terms of telling journalists. So in response to a revelation, therefore, we have to be agreed that they will be anonymous. And therefore, it is central to the ability of journalists to properly investigate stories. So we're talking here about the protection of their sources, you know, as well as for the protection of individuals and whistleblowers who provide information to these journalists. It is very important that we take it that as a given. I need to just clear this up. So in terms of the protection of journalists, since the democracy in 1994, South Africa used to be tortured by the Section 205 of the Criminal Procedure Act, where police felt the need, or they felt empowered to summon journalists to reveal or identify their sources. We know many journalists ended up in jail, the likes of Percy Khoboza, among those journalists who ended up in jail for many years without even what you call trial, because the judge will say, you will have to tell us who's the source. So there was then an agreement forged by SANEF with the NPA, Justice Department, and the Police Ministry. And I think at the time it was Safety and Security. And they signed that, okay, we will not force journalists to come and give us the identity. We will investigate. It will be the last resort. So this Section 205 has not gone away. It remains as is. You know, so strong is the need to protect the sources of journalists, is that we as SANEF had to do this many years ago, more than 15 years that this source has been going on. And by the way, just as a byline, we will soon be recommitting with the Justice Department, with the NPA and the Police Ministry. There will be a re-signing of this document to sort of revive it, to say that it is still applicable. Police will do their investigations, and if it is in the interest of justice, then they will only then call journalists to come forward and maybe force them to reveal sources. I'm not saying journalists will be forced to do that. No, we'll have to do that, but they will have to now know that there's still that X on our necks that says the media, the police can still use that to force us to, even the courts, to force us to reveal the sources. So the situation arises when the interests of journalists clash, you know, with other rights, you know, such as the administration of justice, commonly where information is said to be relevant for a criminal or a civil proceedings. In short, all judges tend to agree that while the state has to prove that it investigated and could not go further than going back to the journalist, only then will the court see whether they could force the journalist to reveal the source. But before, it was not like that. We had to sort of be assumed as by police that we will reveal the sources. So it is the case of Busa operations versus Absa and others in 2012 that the outcome really nailed something for journalists in terms of giving journalists the power to protect their sources. And the judge said, and I quote, "It is apparent that journalists subject to certain limitation, underline that, are not expected to reveal the identity of their sources. If indeed freedom of the press is fundamental and for democracy, it is essential," the judge continued, "that in carrying out this public duty for the public good, the identity of their sources should not be revealed." So there we have it in black and white. So now that journalists can hang on and try as hard as they can to not reveal the source. But in the end, maybe the justice might be the winner, because other judges will say, yes, you are protected somehow, but it is subject to certain limitations. So, but in terms of South Africa, this is as far as we could make. This case really gave us that right to do the best we can to protect our sources. Other journalists went to jail and stayed there for years and never revealed it. So the judge concluded by saying, "I find that the plaintiff, which was the Busa operations, has failed to prove that its right to a fair trial has been infringed." Remember, part of the reason they want us to reveal our sources is because somebody wants this to know who was the mob, and says, therefore, my right to a fair trial will not work. Now, on the contrary, said the judge, to order the defendants to reveal their sources, meaning the journalists, would infringe their freedom of the freedom of the press. And of course, we're still celebrating the day the judge said this ruling. And when you go forward, you realize that in the press code, Section 11 of the Press Code of Ethics and Conduct of South African Print and Online Media, it provides that the media must protect confidential sources of the information and not publish information that constitute a breach of that confidence, unless the public interest dictates otherwise. And many people don't like the press code for having just that line, and it's underlined, unless the public interest dictates otherwise, because it means the Press Council's press code acknowledges that in the interest of justice, we may have to reveal that source, and if you look at other sources, such as the Freedom of Expression Litigation Project, run jointly with Article 19 and Interrights, they argue strongly that the anonymity is the precondition upon which the information is conveyed from the source to the journalist, and they are not compromising. They argue that we should, as journalists, under no circumstance, be willing to give up our sources. So I would leave it at that. We'll debate further as to whether or not going forward we will still find ourselves dragged to courts, but it will always depend on the case-to-case basis. But also now the onus is upon police to prove to the courts at the state that they have done everything they could to find more information to lead to successful prosecution, and therefore now need the journalists to reveal the source so that the prosecution could go forward. So it will always be a tussle there on what should happen. So we are not that at liberty as journalists in South Africa to think that we can say no and that be an end all. I would need to move on to the issue of digital safety. We can take questions later on the matter of protection of sources. But right now we are still, those fundamentals I've given are the source and the pillars of which we could stand our ground and not give up the identity of our sources. Let's look at the things that also end up compromising the what you call our sources, because this is linked. It's a digital safety of journalists. Journalists must these days be techno-savvy. to better protect themselves, to better protect their sources and their information. If you are interviewing a person, you must make sure that whether you use your phone or a digital recorder, you download that and you hide that information. Obviously, you should make sure that there is somebody who can access it in terms maybe of your news editor, your editor-in-chief, but the fewer the number of people who can access that, the better. So if sources require anonymity to be protected, it starts with you as a journalist, to making sure that you secure the recordings, you secure those interviews and the documents that would be handed to you by the whistleblower. Because if you let it out too soon, and then you find that you may have compromised the safety of the whistleblower. So it is therefore important to keep up to date the latest digital security news or threats, such as hacking, phishing, and surveillance. Surveillance, we talked about it, issues of misinformation and so on. It is important that we deal with the issue of surveillance. I think SANEF is still talking to the police department and also to the state national intelligence agencies, but nothing has come out concrete to try and secure a better agreement like we did with the Justice Department on the Section 205 regarding the Criminal Procedure Act. But there is more work going on there to see what we can secure. So far, we still find that state intelligence, police intelligence still do the best they can to do the surveillance of journalists, to even steal the information. There's been journalists' laptops and phones hacked, so that battle continues. Even though there's been a ruling recently that by the court that protected journalists, but we find that there's an intransigent element and attitude from the security intelligence, be it the police or the national or international intelligence. Because of the infighting within some of the leaders, they end up wanting to find that journalist and get the information. In fact, if they can't drag you to court because of your right to protect your source, what they then do is to break into people's houses, steal their laptops, which is why we are dealing with the issue of digital safety. So think about the information you are responsible for and what could happen to it if it falls in the wrong hands. And that means, remember that there are also police who themselves are not what you call genuine. What they can do, they can end up taking, stealing your information and end up giving it to the person who is more in danger. In other words, who's facing criminal proceedings. And that person could then organize a hit, and you find that your source has died. So it is important that we learn to deal with these issues. So the mitigation of risk for journalists in their daily work increasingly hinges on taking thorough proactive steps to protect one's digital security. Ask yourself these questions. Have you backed up your devices on hardware or on cloud? Have you removed sensitive data from your device? If they confiscated your phone, won't you end up with a lot of that information taken away? So download your information from your phone or your digital recordings as much as possible and put it away somewhere. So make sure that you've logged out of your accounts, of your apps and browsers, and not set them to remain logged in. Why? Because when they ever access your laptop or your desktop at work, remember when we all leave work and go away, we don't know whether somebody might end up getting into our offices and logging to our laptop at work and therefore connecting and finding our information. So it is very important that we learn to log off and switch off these things. Ask yourself, have you set up strong, unique passwords for all your accounts? Have you put in a PIN log or password on all your devices? Get to know them and make sure that you protect your information. And also learn to find encrypted devices or encrypt your devices or make encrypted apps so that your information is not easily recorded or stolen, so that you protect your sources in particular. Because in every phone call, you might identify your source. So I've spoken about passwords, and do you have oh, I repeated my information. I apologize. So there's also this thing that you have to learn to turn on two-factor authentication. In other words, if somebody got hold of your password, you may find that if you also have another authentication, there are apps to help you with authentication. They can give you a code, a random code, so that you edit, or they can send you an OTP so that you then use that to connect. And also you can use your finger if your phone has got fingerprinting, or have got do some scanning for your face or eyes. So there are all sorts of devices now that are being installed into our devices. Try to learn to use them. They will help you. Even if the police was to confiscate your phone, they may find that they are not able to sort of break it easily. We know that some certain phones, gadgets, are more better than others. So try to use the latest technology. Maybe even try to convince your newsroom editors and bosses to get you better laptops or smartphones to help you deal with the issue of protecting your information. And then now coming to your personal accounts, please. That is very important when it comes to social media. When it comes to social media, people can duplicate or clone your accounts. Try to protect them. Try to find a way to make sure that you have the privacy settings reviewed on you. You can even phone Facebook or email them, or even Twitter. Sort of you can engage these social networks these days and sort of ask for assistance. So, and then you get to move forward. And also, even with your social media accounts, make sure that your passwords are long, that they are complicated a little bit, and you have a way where you can maybe write them on another phone, if you have another phone, and so on. But make sure that you can keep them. People used to keep what you call a black book at one stage, but we also know the danger of the black book. One of our fellow journalists once lost his black book and lost all the contact numbers and sort of passwords, and he was in trouble with that. So somehow have that, you take a picture of that, turn it into some kind of a PDF, and maybe ask a colleague to keep it, a trusted colleague, or maybe at home, if you have a way to keep that. Also, download your stuff not only on cloud. If you can keep a backup system, that would be great. But also, even if you have a backup system of what you have downloaded, try to make sure that it's encrypted, it's code protected, to make sure that you are safe. My time is up, so I'm going to come into conclusion quickly. So consider getting your account verified by the social media company. I've said that. Monitor your accounts for signs of increased trolling activity. Try to see that, and that will help you to notice that you may have written or broadcast a good story, yes, a very successful story, yes, a well-researched story, yes, but you have angered or stepped on the toes of people such as any other politicians, maybe, or maybe depending of companies, or journalists who are dealing with crime. You may have even revealed the underworld who may see you as a threat. So make sure that you create and you monitor this. When you see such trolling activity grows, you can then take that to your managers and say, look, I think I may need some kind of a protection here. I might be in trouble. Another thing, guys, some of us like telling, and I'm one of those who's guilty. I was in Durban or Cape Town. I start telling friends that I'm in Durban, I'm at this beach, I'm at this hotel, or I'm at this bar, and I'm taking pictures. I'm happy to be at the beach. But please note that it is advisable for journalists not to post about your live location until you have left the place. So that is very helpful. But it is also important that somebody knows where you are, somebody trusted. You tell them that, look, guys, I'm going to be going to such a Shishanyama, or I'm going to do this story at such a place, I'm going for this meeting, so that you do not disappear from the face of the earth without anybody knowing what was your last location. That will come to help us. I'll mention this later about the election portal when we are closing. So this is how far my presentation goes, guys.